The bitter winds of the Dakota winter cut through my threadbare dress like knives of ice. 12 hours had passed since they'd left me here, chained to this ancient oak, my punishment for attempting to flee. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My fingers had long since lost feeling, and a strange warmth was beginning to replace the biting cold, a warmth I knew to be death's deceptive embrace. Snow piled around my feet as I drifted in and out of consciousness, the iron shackles biting into my wrists each time I slumped forward. I'd given up hope of rescue when a shadow moved against the blinding white of the prairie. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, my mind's final mercy before surrendering to the cold. But the figure drew closer, mounted on a paint horse that moved with silent purpose through the deep snow. The rider, wrapped in furs against the brutal cold, was clearly Native American, a Lakota warrior, I would later learn, far from his hunting grounds. Our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment my life changed forever. Not just because he would free me from those chains, but because meeting him would set me on a path I never could have imagined. This is the story of how I went from being a captive, moments from death, to discovering strength I never knew I possessed, and a world I never knew existed. The year was 1862. My name is Sarah Collins, and I had come west with my husband Thomas as part of a small wagon train heading to the Washington Territory. We had left our modest life in Ohio behind, drawn by promises of fertile land and new opportunities in the wake of the Homestead Act. Thomas was a quiet, hard-working man who dreamed of building a prosperous farm where we could raise a family. Away from the growing tensions of the Civil War, we never made it to Washington. Our wagon train was attacked 3 days after crossing into Dakota territory. It happened at dawn, the screams and gunshots tearing through the quiet morning as a group of outlaws descended upon us. They weren't Native Americans as many back east would assume, but white men, deserters and criminals who preyed on vulnerable travelers. I still remember Thomas pushing me under our wagon, telling me to stay silent before grabbing his rifle and stepping out to defend what was ours. I watched through a gap in the canvas as he was shot in the chest, his body crumpling to the ground as his blood soaked into the prairie soil. I covered my mouth to stifle my scream, tears burning hot tracks down my frozen cheeks. When the shooting stopped, the outlaws moved through the camp, taking anything of value. I thought I might escape notice, but as I tried to crawl away through the tall grass, rough hands seized me by the ankles and dragged me back. The leader, a man called Jackson with a scar running from his left eye to his chin, declared I would fetch a good price in certain establishments further west. For 2 weeks, I was held captive at their makeshift camp, hidden in a forested valley. I wasn't alone. 3 other women had been taken from various wagon trains and stagecoaches. One by one, they were taken away, sold to passing traders or to settlements with few women. I plotted my escape daily, waiting for the men to drink themselves into a stupor, as they often did. My chance came during a particularly cold night when only 2 men remained to guard us, the others having gone to a nearby mining camp to sell their stolen goods. I slipped free of the poorly tied ropes binding my wrists and ran into the darkness, guided only by starlight and desperation. I made it nearly 5 miles before they caught up with me the next morning. Jackson was furious. "Boys, seems we have a wild one who needs to learn some respect," he announced, circling me on his horse as I stood shivering in the snow. "Take her back to camp?" one of the others asked. "No," Jackson decided, his eyes cold. "She needs to understand what happens to property that tries to run. Chain her to that oak yonder and let the winter teach her a lesson. We'll come back. Tomorrow, if she's still alive, perhaps she'll be more cooperative." They had a heavy chain and iron shackles among their stolen goods, items likely intended for mining operations. The metal was freezing against my skin as they locked my wrists to the lowest branch of a massive oak that stood alone on the prairie, a landmark in the otherwise featureless expanse of white. "Enjoy your night under the stars," Jackson sneered, tipping his hat in mock courtesy before riding away with his men, their laughter carrying back to me on the wind. The first few hours I screamed until my voice gave out, pulling against the chains until my wrists were raw and bleeding. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. I tried to keep moving, to keep my blood flowing, but exhaustion eventually overcame me. I would stand until my legs gave out, slump forward until the pain in my wrists jolted me awake, then struggle back to my feet to begin the cycle again. By morning, I had accepted that I would die there. Strange how peaceful that acceptance was, as if my mind had already begun to separate from my suffering body. I thought of Thomas, wondering if I would see him soon, if there was indeed something beyond this life. The sun rose, casting long shadows across the snow, but bringing no warmth. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent. That's when I saw him, the lone rider approaching from the west. My eyes, caked with frozen tears, could barely focus on the figure. As he drew closer, I saw he was Native American. His long black hair adorned with a single eagle feather, his face marked with red paint across the cheekbones. I felt no fear, only curiosity about this unexpected witness to my final moments. What would he do upon finding a white woman chained to a tree? Would he leave me to my fate, end my suffering more quickly? Or perhaps, most cruelly of all, simply watch? He dismounted his horse with fluid grace, studying me cautiously from a distance. I must have been a pitiful sight, half frozen, my dress torn, hair matted with snow and blood from a cut on my forehead where Jackson had struck me. "Water!" I managed to croak, the first and only word I could summon from my parched throat. Something in his expression shifted. He reached for a pouch at his waist, approached slowly, and held it to my lips. The lukewarm water was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I drank greedily, some spilling down my chin and freezing instantly against my neck. He spoke, but in words I couldn't understand. His tone was questioning. When I didn't respond, he pointed to the chains, then made a motion like breaking something. "Yes," I whispered. "Please." He examined the locks on the shackles, then returned. To his horse. From a beaded leather bag, he withdrew several metal tools that looked like slender knives. I realized he meant to pick the locks. Where had a Lakota warrior learned such a skill? I wondered absently, my mind drifting in and out of clarity. It took what seemed like hours, though it was likely only minutes. The metal clinked softly as he worked, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. When the first shackle opened, my arm fell limply to my side, shooting pain returning to the numbed limb. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. He worked more quickly on the second lock, having learned its mechanism from the first. When I was finally free, my legs buckled beneath me. He caught me before I hit the ground, his strong arms lifting me with surprising gentleness. He carried me to his horse and somehow managed to mount with me cradled against his chest. I remember little of the journey that followed, only the rhythmic movement of the horse, the warrior's steady heartbeat against my ear, and the sensation of being wrapped in a buffalo robe he had pulled from behind his saddle. I must have lost consciousness, for the next thing I recall is waking in a small teepee, a fire burning in a central pit, its smoke rising through an opening at the top. My clothes had been replaced with a soft buckskin dress, and my wounds had been cleaned and dressed with some kind of herbal paste that smelled of pine and sage. An elderly woman sat nearby, grinding something in a stone mortar. When she saw I was awake, she called out, and moments later, the warrior who had rescued me ducked through the entrance. In the firelight, I could see his features clearly for the first time. He was younger than I had initially thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with intelligent eyes and a strong jawline. "You are safe now," he said in accented but clear English, surprising me. "I am called Swift Hawk. The woman who tends you is my grandmother, Grey Dove." "Sarah," I replied weakly. "Sarah Collins. Thank you for saving my life." He nodded once, acceptance of my gratitude without need for elaboration. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The men who did this to you, they are known to us. They have attacked our hunting parties and stolen our horses. They are bad spirits in human form. "They killed my husband," I said, the words catching in my throat, "and many others from our wagon train." "Rest now," he said simply. "When you are stronger, we will speak more." The next several days passed in a haze of sleep and healing. Grey Dove fed me rich bone broth and herbal teas, while applying fresh medicine to my wrists and the frostbitten patches on my feet. She spoke no English, but communicated through gestures and expressions that I came to understand with surprising ease. Swift Hawk visited daily, sometimes sitting in silence, other times sharing information about the Lakota camp where I now found myself. I learned it was a small winter encampment of about 20 families, separated from the main tribe until spring would allow them to rejoin their people. "Why did you help me?" I asked him on the third day, when I was finally able to sit up without assistance. "Most white people believe all Indians would scalp them on sight." A hint of amusement crossed his face. "And most of my people believe all white people would shoot them on sight. Are all beliefs true?" I conceded his point with a small smile, the first that had crossed my lips since Thomas died. "I was taught by my father that we must judge each being by their actions, not by the color of their skin or the language of their tongue," he continued. "I saw someone suffering who needed help, nothing more. But there was more, as I would learn in the days that followed." Swift Hawk had been educated at a mission school for several years as a boy, sent there by his father, a forward-thinking chief who believed understanding the white man's ways would help his people navigate the changing world. Swift Hawk had returned to his tribe, rejecting much of what the missionaries had tried to teach him, but keeping the English language and certain knowledge that proved useful. As my strength returned, I began to venture outside Grey Dove's teepee. The Lakota winter camp was nestled in a protected valley, the teepees arranged in a circle. Children played in the snow, women worked on hides or prepared food, men repaired weapons and tools. I drew curious stares at first, but no hostility. A young girl of about 8 approached me one morning, offering a small carved wooden horse. "For you," she said shyly in English, before running back to her friends who giggled and watched from a distance. Swift Hawk, who had been observing from nearby, walked over. "That is Little Feather, my sister's daughter. She has been practicing those words all morning." "It's beautiful," I said, touched by the unexpected gift. "Our children are taught that strangers can become family," he explained. "They are trying to welcome you." "Even though I'm white?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "They see you as someone Swift Hawk brought to the camp who was hurt and needs help," he replied simply. "The rest matters little to them." How different from the world I had known, where differences in skin color, religion, or birthplace created barriers that seemed insurmountable. Here, in this supposedly savage community, I was being accepted simply because I needed help, and because Swift Hawk had deemed me worthy of assistance. As the days passed and my strength returned, I began to help with camp tasks, preparing food, mending clothing, gathering firewood. Grey Dove taught me to bead designs on leather, her gnarled fingers surprisingly nimble as they demonstrated the intricate patterns. I learned a few words of Lakota, much to the delight of the children, who would collapse in laughter at my mispronunciations before eagerly correcting me. One evening, about 3 weeks after my rescue, Swift Hawk invited me to walk with him to a nearby ridge. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. We stood in companionable silence, watching the spectacle. "My people will move camp when the moon of popping trees ends," he said finally, using the Lakota name for January. "We will join the larger band to prepare for spring buffalo hunts." My heart sank. I had known this peaceful interlude couldn't last forever, but I hadn't allowed myself to think about what would come next. "There is a trading post 3 days' ride from here," he continued. "I could take you there when you are fully healed. They might help you find passage east, back to your people." Back to my people. The words echoed strangely in my mind. Who were my people now? My parents had died years ago. Thomas was gone. We had left behind few close friends in Ohio. The thought of returning to a world where I would forever be the poor widow Collins held little appeal. "What if I wanted to stay?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. Swift Hawk turned to look at me, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "With the Lakota?" "Yes," I said, more confident now. "I could continue to learn your ways, help with the children, perhaps teach some English to those who wish to learn." "It would not be easy," he warned. "Some in the larger band will not welcome a white woman. And the soldiers at the fort will see a white woman living willingly with Indians as a traitor." "I have nothing to go back to," I said simply, "and your people have shown me more kindness as a stranger than I often received among my own kind." He was silent for a long moment. "There is something else you should know," he said finally. "The men who hurt you, they still hunt these lands. If they found you with us, they would claim we had taken you captive. They would use it as an excuse to attack our people." The mention of Jackson and his gang sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. "They would recognize me," I acknowledged. "I would bring danger to your people." Swift Hawk nodded, his face grave. "This is true. But it is also true that you have suffered greatly and deserve to choose your own path forward. I will speak with the elders. The decision must be theirs and yours." We returned to camp in thoughtful silence. That night I lay awake in Grey Dove's teepee, listening to her soft snoring and the crackling of the dying fire. For the first time since Thomas died, I allowed myself to truly contemplate my future. What did I want from the life that had been so unexpectedly returned to me? The answer came with surprising clarity. I wanted justice, not just for myself, but for Thomas, for the others from our wagon train, and for the native people who lived in fear of men like Jackson. The authorities at distant forts paid little attention to attacks on travelers or Indian villages, dismissing them as unfortunate but inevitable consequences of frontier life. If I returned east, Jackson and his men would continue their reign of terror unchecked. If I stayed with the Lakota, I would endanger the very people who had saved me. There seemed no clear path forward that didn't end in more suffering. The next morning, I sought out Swift Hawk as he returned from checking his traps. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, without preamble, "about Jackson and his men still being out there." He nodded, waiting for me to continue. "These men need to be stopped," I said firmly, "not just for what they did to me, but for all the others they've hurt and will hurt if they're allowed to continue." "The soldiers at the fort do nothing," Swift Hawk replied, echoing my own thoughts. "They say they cannot spare men to hunt outlaws when they are needed to watch for hostile Indians." "Then we must stop them ourselves," I said, the plan forming as I spoke. "You know these lands. I know their faces, their habits. Together, we could find them, capture them, and bring them to justice." Swift Hawk studied me with new interest. "This is not what I expected you to say." Nor what I expected to hear myself say, I admitted, but I cannot go back to my old life as if none of this happened, and I cannot put your people at risk by staying. This seems the only path forward. That makes sense. It would be dangerous, he warned. These men are killers. So am I now, I replied quietly, or at least I am capable of it. They made me so when they took everything from me. A look of understanding passed between us. Swifthawk had recognized something in me that day by the oak tree, something beyond a helpless victim. He had seen a survivor, someone whose spirit had not been broken despite everything that had been done to her. I will speak with the council tonight, he said finally. Such a hunt would require preparation, supplies, and I cannot go against the wishes of the elders. That evening I was invited to sit before the council of elders. 5 men and 2 women whose lined faces spoke of decades of wisdom and hardship. I told my story, not sparing any details, explaining my desire to see Jackson and his men brought to justice. The eldest of the council, a man called Bear Who Walks, listened intently before addressing me in Lakota, which Swifthawk translated. "The woman has courage," he said. "But this is not our fight. The white man's justice is not our concern." "With respect," I replied, "these men threaten everyone, white or Lakota. They attacked your hunting parties as well as my wagon train. They respect no boundaries." Another elder, a woman with silver hair and penetrating eyes, spoke next. "Why should we risk our warriors to help capture men who will likely go free once taken to the white man's fort? Their law does not value our word." It was a valid point, one I had considered. "Then we don't take them to the fort," I said firmly. "We find another way to ensure they can harm no one else." My words hung in the air, their implication clear. Swifthawk translated, his voice betraying no emotion, but I could sense his surprise at my boldness. The council spoke among themselves in rapid Lakota that I couldn't follow. Finally, Bear Who Walks addressed me directly in halting English. "You seek blood," he said, not as an accusation but as a simple statement of fact. "I seek justice," I corrected. "But yes, I am willing to spill blood if necessary to prevent more innocent deaths." He nodded slowly. "This is understood. We have lost many to men like these, but such a hunt is not for a woman alone." "I do not ask to go alone," I replied. "I ask for Swifthawk's help and any others who would join us." Bear Who Walks turned to Swifthawk, speaking at length in Lakota. Swifthawk responded respectfully but firmly, occasionally gesturing toward me. I caught my name several times, and Jackson's. Finally, the council seemed to reach a decision. Bear Who Walks turned back to me. "You saved by Lakota hands," he said carefully. "Now bound to us by life debt, Swifthawk says you have strong heart. Council agrees. You and Swifthawk may hunt these bad men, but with conditions." "What conditions?" I asked. "First, you wait until Moon of Popping Trees ends, too dangerous now in deep snow. Second, you take no unnecessary risks. Third," he fixed me with a penetrating stare, "you remember justice, not same as revenge. Understand difference." I nodded solemnly. "I understand and accept these conditions." And so began my transformation from victim to hunter. Over the following weeks, as January gave way to February and the grip of winter slowly loosened, Swifthawk trained me in the Lakota ways of tracking, moving silently through forests and using weapons beyond the simple rifles I was familiar with. I learned to throw a tomahawk with reasonable accuracy, to use a bow and arrow, to move on snowshoes across the frozen landscape. My body, once soft from city living, grew lean and strong. My hands, once suited only for needlework and playing, the piano became calloused and capable. The Lakota women taught me to disguise myself, applying paints to my face and arms to darken my skin, showing me how to braid my hair in their style and wear their clothing in a way that would allow me to pass for native from a distance. This They explained would be essential if we were to track Jackson and his men without being immediately recognized. Swift Hawk and I developed a plan. We would not attempt to capture the entire gang at once. There were too many, and they were too well armed. Instead, we would isolate them one by one, beginning with the weakest links until Jackson himself was vulnerable. As the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, we prepared for our journey. The camp was breaking up anyway, with families preparing to join the larger band. Swift Hawk and I would separate from the others, heading toward the areas where Jackson and his men were known to operate. The night before our departure, Grey Dove presented me with a gift, a necklace of bear claws and beads that she placed around my neck with solemn ceremony. For protection, Swift Hawk translated. Bear strength now yours. I touched the necklace, deeply moved. Tell her I will wear it always, and remember her teachings. That night, as I prepared my few possessions, I reflected on the extraordinary path my life had taken. 6 weeks earlier, I had been chained to a tree, certain I would die alone in the brutal Dakota winter. Now I was embarking on a mission of justice alongside a Lakota warrior, carrying the blessing of his people. I had lost everything I had once valued, my husband, my home, my future as I had imagined it. Yet in that loss, I had found something unexpected, a strength I never knew I possessed, and a purpose that burned brighter than any I had known before. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, Swift Hawk and I mounted our horses, now laden with supplies for our journey. The entire camp gathered to see us off, offering prayers and gifts for our safe return. I looked at their faces, some solemn, some concerned, all supportive, and felt a surge of determination. I was no longer Sarah Collins, the frightened widow, chained to an oak tree. I was a woman transformed by suffering and kindness in equal measure. Whatever lay ahead, justice or death, I would face it on my own terms, with courage born of survival and purpose born of loss. Swift Hawk turned to me as we crested the first hill, the camp disappearing behind us. "Are you afraid?" he asked simply. I considered the question honestly before answering. "Yes," I admitted, "but not enough to turn back." He nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. "Then we will succeed." Together, we urged our horses forward, riding toward an uncertain future, but driven by the certainty of our resolve. The hunt for justice and perhaps redemption had begun. What awaited us in the spring thaw of the Dakota Territory would test everything I had learned and everything I had become. But as we rode side by side into the warming dawn, I knew one thing beyond doubt. I was no longer in chains, neither the iron ones that had bound my wrists, nor the invisible ones that had limited my understanding of who I could be. I was free, and I intended to use that freedom to ensure others would not suffer as I had. The early spring sun offered little warmth as Swift Hawk and I followed the meandering course of the White River. 2 weeks had passed since we'd left the winter camp, and in that time we'd picked up the trail of Jackson's gang 3 times, only to lose it again. Unlike the deep tracks they'd left in snow during winter, their passing was now marked by subtler signs: broken twigs, disturbed grasses, occasional campfire remains. Swift Hawk read these traces like words on a page, teaching me to do the same, with patient instruction. "Here," he said, dismounting and crouching beside what looked to me like ordinary soil. "See how the earth is pressed differently. A heavy man walked here carrying weight on his right side." I slid from my horse and knelt beside him, studying the barely perceptible depression. Could be one of Jackson's men. The one called Reeves walked with a limp from an old bullet wound. Swift Hawk nodded. "How many days ago?" he asked, testing me. I examined the tracks, noting how the edges had begun to soften from recent light rain. 2 days? Maybe 3? 2, he confirmed. "You are learning." Such praise, sparse as it was, filled me with a pride I'd never experienced in my previous life. Every new skill mastered was another step away from the helpless woman I'd been, another tool to ensure I would never be at anyone's mercy again. We followed the tracks until they joined a well-worn trail leading toward a small settlement that had sprung up around a trading post called Fort Hanson. Not a true military fort, but a sturdy outpost named for its founder. Swift Hawk stopped before we came within sight of the buildings. "I cannot go farther," he reminded me. "White settlements are not safe for Lakota now." I nodded, understanding the risk. Relations between settlers and native tribes had grown increasingly tense. Over the past year, a band of Santee Sioux, driven to desperation by broken treaties and starvation, had attacked settlements in Minnesota the previous summer. Though the Lakota had not been involved, all native peoples were now viewed with suspicion and hostility. "Remember the plan," Swift Hawk continued. "Listen, observe, gather information only. Do not try to confront them alone." "I remember," I assured him, though my heart quickened at the prospect of possibly seeing Jackson or his men face to face. We had developed a careful strategy over the preceding weeks. I would enter settlements in my original identity as Sarah, Collins' widow, telling a modified version of my story, that I had survived an attack on my wagon train and been taken in by sympathetic travelers who had helped me reach safety. This would explain my presence in the territory without raising questions about where I had spent the winter. Swift Hawk would remain hidden nearby, keeping watch from a distance. We would meet at predetermined locations after I had gathered whatever information I could about Jackson's gang. "I will wait in the grove of cottonwoods by the river bend," he said, pointing to a distant cluster of trees. "If you are not back by sundown tomorrow, I will come looking for you." "I'll be careful," I promised, removing my Lakota-style clothing and retrieving a simple calico dress from my pack. Swift Hawk turned away respectfully as I changed, another gesture that reminded me of how far we'd come from our initial awkward encounters. When I emerged from behind a stand of brush, I looked every bit the respectable widow, hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet, dress clean if somewhat worn, manner appropriately subdued. Only the bear-claw necklace from Grey Dove remained, of my Lakota appearance, but I tucked it inside my collar, out of sight. "Good hunting," Swift Hawk said simply as I mounted my horse. I nodded, feeling the now familiar shift in my bearing as I stepped back into my former identity. "I'll return by noon tomorrow." Fort Hanson proved to be a collection of rough-hewn buildings clustered around a larger central structure that served as trading post, saloon, and general gathering place. A dozen smaller cabins scattered outward from this hub, with a stable and blacksmith shop completing the modest settlement. Perhaps 30 people called it home permanently, with trappers, traders, and travelers swelling its population temporarily. I rode directly to the trading post, where a weathered sign proclaimed Hanson's General Goods and Sundries. The man who emerged at the sound of my approach was tall and broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and keen eyes that assessed me carefully. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he greeted, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. "Don't believe I've seen you in these parts before." "Sarah Collins," I introduced myself, using the practice story we had rehearsed. "I'm trying to reach Fort Laramie. My husband and I were traveling with a wagon train bound for Washington Territory when we were attacked 3 months ago. Thomas, my husband, was killed, but I was found by a family heading east who helped me reach safety." The man's expression softened with sympathy. "James Hanson, ma'am. Sorry to hear of your troubles. We've had too many attacks on honest folk these past years." He helped me down from my horse. "You'll be wanting a meal and rest, I expect. My wife Emma runs a small boarding house just behind the trading post." "That would be most welcome," I replied with genuine gratitude. "I also hope to inquire about transport to Fort Laramie. I have family in Missouri who can help me return east. Stage comes through every other week, Hansen informed me. Next one's due day after tomorrow, if the weather holds. Happy to arrange passage for you. He led me to a tidy two-story building where Mrs. Hansen, a plump, energetic woman with kind eyes, welcomed me warmly upon hearing my story. She showed me to a small but clean room and insisted I join them for the evening meal, which I gratefully accepted. This would give me the opportunity to listen for any mention of Jackson or his men. The communal dinner included the Hansens, 3 traders passing through, and an elderly couple who apparently helped manage the boarding house. Conversation flowed easily, touching on weather, conditions of the trails, news from other settlements, and eventually, to my carefully disguised interest, talk of outlaw activity in the region. Soldiers from Fort Laramie came through last week looking for that Jackson gang, one of the traders mentioned. Seems they hit another wagon train near the North Platte, killed 3 men and took everything of value. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my fork, but I kept my expression neutral, merely concerned rather than intensely interested. "Those devils still operating?" another trader asked. "Thought the army would have caught up to them by now." Hansen shook his head grimly. "Too few soldiers spread too thin, and Jackson knows this country better than most. Word is, they've got a new hiding place somewhere in the Black Hills. Army won't follow them there, too deep in Indian territory. Speaking of which," the first trader lowered his voice, though his words carried clearly in the small dining room, "heard some of the Lakota bands are on the move early this year. 3 hunters came through yesterday saying they spotted a sizable group heading toward Bear Butte." Mrs. Hansen glanced at me apologetically. Perhaps not the most comfortable dinner conversation for someone who suffered at the hands of attackers. I seized the opening. "Actually, I'd like to know more about this Jackson. Was he responsible for other attacks on wagon trains? The men who attacked us wore cloth over their faces. I never saw them clearly." The traders exchanged glances. "Frank Jackson's been terrorizing these parts for nigh on 3 years, Hansen explained. "Started with stage robberies, moved on to wagon trains when the stage companies hired armed guards. Has about 6 or 7 men riding with him. From what we hear, 8 now," corrected the older trader. "Picked up a deserter from Fort Kearney last fall. Mean character with a scar across his cheek. Goes by the name of Webb." I committed the new name to memory. "Are there descriptions of these men?" "In case." I let my voice trail off. "In case you encounter them," Hansen finished sympathetically. "Fair question. Jackson himself is tall, dark-haired with a scar from eye to chin, always wears a red bandana. His second is a fellow called Reeves, shorter, with a pronounced limp. The others I couldn't say much about, except they're a rough lot, even by frontier standards." The conversation eventually turned to other matters, but I had gleaned valuable information. Jackson's gang had grown to 8 men. They had a new hiding place in the Black Hills, and they had recently been active near the North Platte River. Most importantly, they had been spotted recently enough that their general location was known. After dinner, I excused myself, claiming fatigue from travel. In the privacy of my room, I sat by the window that faced away from the settlement, toward the distant cottonwood grove where Swifthawk waited. I had learned enough to warrant reporting back before morning, but leaving in the night would draw unwanted attention. A soft knock at my door startled me. I opened it to find Mrs. Hansen holding a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might welcome this, dear," she said kindly. "Can't imagine what you've been through, losing your husband so violently and having to make your way in this wilderness." "Thank you," I said, accepting the cup. "Everyone has been very kind." She hesitated in the doorway. "If you don't mind my asking, how did you survive after the attack? These plains can be unforgiving, especially to someone alone." The question was innocent enough, but I sensed genuine curiosity beneath it. I offered the version of events Swifthawk and I had crafted. I hid during the attack, I explained. Afterward, I was able to salvage some supplies. I walked east along the trail for 3 days before a family in a wagon found me. The Petersons, they were returning to St. Louis after finding the Washington. Territory not to their liking. They brought me as far as Fort Collins, where I worked briefly to earn money for continuing my journey. Mrs. Hanson seemed satisfied with this explanation. Providence was watching over you, it seems. Too many women in your situation don't survive out here. I've been fortunate, I agreed, thinking of Swifthawk finding me chained to that oak. Moments from death, though not in the way Mrs. Hanson would understand. Fortunate. Well, rest well. Breakfast is at sunrise if you'd like to join us. After she left, I sipped the tea while planning my next move. I needed to get word to Swifthawk about what I'd learned, but I also wanted to gather more information from the settlement before departing. The traders who had mentioned seeing Jackson's gang might have more details that could help us. I woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and made my way downstairs. The trading post would not open for another hour, giving me time to examine the settlement more carefully in the early morning light. Few people were stirring as I walked between the scattered buildings, mentally noting potential approaches and exits, places where someone might hide and observe undetected, skills Swifthawk had taught me during our weeks of training. As I circled back toward the boarding house, movement near the stables caught my attention. 2 men were preparing horses, speaking in low voices. Something in their furtive manner made me pause in the shadow of a storage shed. I couldn't make out their words, but their posture suggested secrecy. One of them turned slightly, and the rising sun illuminated his profile. My blood ran cold as I recognized the distinctive jawline and broad shoulders of Webb, the newest member of Jackson's gang, according to last night's conversation. The scar on his cheek was clearly visible even from this distance. I shrank deeper, into the shadows, heart pounding. What were Jackson's men doing in Fort Hanson? Were they simply passing through, or was this a regular stop for them? Either way, their presence meant danger. For me, if they recognized me, and for Swifthawk, if they discovered a Lakota warrior waiting nearby. The men finished preparing their horses and mounted. They rode not toward the main trail, but behind the settlement, taking a less obvious path that led north. I watched until they disappeared from view, then hurried back to the boarding house where I found Mrs. Hanson preparing breakfast. "You're up with the birds," she commented cheerfully. "I wanted to see the sunrise," I replied, forcing a smile. "Mrs. Hanson, do you know the 2 men who just left from the stables? I noticed them riding out as I was walking." Her expression grew guarded. "Can't say I caught sight of them. Lots of folk passed through Fort Hanson, not all of them stopping to introduce themselves proper-like." Her sudden reticence set off warnings in my mind. She knew something about those men, but wasn't willing to share it with a stranger. I decided not to press the issue. Of course, I was merely curious. The settlement seemed so small, I assumed. You might know everyone who visits. She relaxed slightly. "We get all sorts here. Traders, trappers, miners heading to the hills. Best not to be too curious about everyone's business in these parts." After breakfast, I thanked the Hansons for their hospitality and announced my intention to continue exploring the settlement until the stage arrived. My actual plan was to find a way to slip away and report to Swifthawk what I had seen, but first I wanted to speak with the traders who had mentioned Jackson at dinner. I found them at the trading post, bartering with James Hanson over the price of beaver pelts. I browsed the modest selection of goods while waiting for their business to conclude, then approached as they were preparing to leave. "Excuse me," I began. "I couldn't help overhearing your mention of the Jackson gang at dinner last night. I've been very concerned about encountering outlaws on my journey, and I wondered if you might have any further advice about areas to avoid." The older trader, who had introduced himself as Caleb during dinner, regarded me with sympathy. Planning to take the stage to Fort Laramie, aren't you? You'll be safe enough there. Stage has armed guards these days, specifically because of Jackson and his ilk. Have you encountered them personally? I pressed. I'm trying to determine if they might be the same men who attacked our wagon train. Caleb and his companion exchanged glances. Never faced them directly, Caleb admitted, but I've seen the aftermath of their work. Found a family dead on the trail near Shell Creek last fall. Jackson's style right enough. Men shot, valuables taken, wagons burned. His companion, a younger man called Porter, added, "We heard they've been using the old Wilson mining camp as a base recently. It's abandoned, tucked into a canyon in the southern Black Hills. Perfect hideout, only one way in or out, easily. Defended." This was exactly the kind of information I'd hoped to uncover. Wilson mining camp, I repeated, committing it to memory. I appreciate your candor, gentlemen. Knowledge feels like the only defense I have at present. Best defense is to stick to populated routes and travel with armed company, Caleb advised. Which is what you're doing right, taking the stage. Absolutely, I assured him, feeling only the slightest twinge of guilt at the deception. By midday, I had gathered as much information as I could without arousing suspicion. I needed to get back to Swifthawk, but leaving before the expected stage arrival might seem strange after I'd made such a point of waiting for it. I decided to create a reason for a temporary absence. I approached James Hanson as he worked in his store. "Mr. Hanson, I find I'm in need of some quiet reflection. My husband and I often read from Scripture together in the evenings, and I thought I might visit that lovely grove of cottonwoods by the river to read from my Bible and remember him. Would that be safe, do you think?" Hanson considered the request. "Safe enough in daylight. The grove is less than a mile off. Just be back before dusk. We sometimes get wolves coming down to the river in the evening." "I'll be careful," I promised. "I shouldn't be more than a few hours." I returned to my room, collected my few belongings, and tucked them into a small bag I could easily conceal beneath my shawl. Then, Bible in hand for appearance's sake, I walked openly through the settlement toward the river, aware of curious glances, but projecting only the image of a grieving widow seeking solace. Once I reached the cottonwood grove and was certain I wasn't observed, I quickened my pace, moving deeper into the trees where Swifthawk and I had agreed to meet. He materialized so suddenly from behind a massive trunk that I started despite knowing to expect him. "You found something," he said immediately, reading my expression. "Jackson's men were at Fort Hanson this morning," I reported. "At least 2 of them. I recognized Webb from descriptions, and I've learned they're using an abandoned mining camp in the southern Black Hills as their new base, the Wilson camp." Swifthawk's expression grew grave. "The Black Hills are sacred to my people. Their presence there is an additional offense. The traders also mentioned Jackson's gang attacked another wagon train near the North Platte recently. They're still active, still killing." My voice hardened. "How far is this Wilson camp from here?" 3 days' ride, Swifthawk estimated. "Difficult terrain, especially for someone not familiar with the area." He studied me carefully. "Did anyone at the settlement recognize you?" I shook my head. "No, but I can't return. I told them I was waiting for the stage to Fort Laramie, but now that I know Jackson's men visit there, it's too dangerous. They might recognize me from the camp where they held me captive." "Then we leave now," Swifthawk decided. "Circle wide around the settlement and head west. The longer we delay, the more trail they make for us to follow." I changed quickly back into my Lakota clothing, feeling a sense of relief as I shed the restrictive dress and bonnet. The garments Grey Dove and the other women had crafted for me were not only more practical for riding and tracking, but had come to represent the freedom I'd found among them. Freedom from the constraints of my former life, as much as from physical captivity, As we mounted our horses and prepared to depart, I noticed Swift Hawk watching me with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" I asked. "You move differently in the white woman's clothes," he observed. "Smaller, more hesitant. In Lakota dress, you sit taller on your horse." I considered his words, recognizing their truth. When I wear those clothes, I become what I was before, a proper widow, demure and dependent. It's like stepping back into a cage I didn't even know I lived in until I escaped it. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. My father spent one winter living among the white men in their settlement. When he returned, he said he had felt his spirit shrinking. Each day he wore their clothes and followed their customs. He told me, "They have invisible chains that bind them more surely than any rope or iron." "Your father was wise," I replied. "I never saw those chains until they were broken." We rode in companionable silence for several miles, keeping to wooded areas where possible to avoid being spotted from the settlement. By nightfall, we had put considerable distance between ourselves and Fort Hanson, making camp in a sheltered ravine where our small fire wouldn't be visible from a distance. As we shared a simple meal of dried meat and corn cakes, I found myself studying Swift Hawk's face in the flickering firelight. In the months since my rescue, I had come to know this man better than I had known anyone, including my husband Thomas. We had spent countless hours together, training, tracking, planning, sharing stories of our vastly different lives before fate had thrown us together. "You're staring," he observed, without looking up from the arrow he was fletching. "I was thinking about how strange life's path can be," I admitted. "If you hadn't found me that day—" "But I did," he said simply. "Why were you so far from your people's camp?" I asked, realizing I had never questioned this apparent coincidence. "You were alone, miles from where your band was wintering." Swift Hawk's hands stilled. "I had a dream," he said after a moment. "3 nights before I found you. In the dream, Wakantanka, the great mystery, showed me a tree standing alone on the prairie. From its branches hung something precious that would be lost if I did not find it." A chill ran through me despite the fire's warmth. "You believe I was that precious thing?" "I believe that dreams are one way the spirits speak to us," he replied carefully. "When I woke that morning, I felt pulled to ride east, though there was no practical reason to do so. I followed that feeling until I saw the oak tree on the horizon, exactly as it had appeared in my dream. The revelation left me speechless. I had attributed my rescue to fortunate chance, but Swift Hawk saw it as spiritual guidance. Which interpretation was correct? Perhaps both, I decided. The universe worked in ways neither of our cultures fully understood. "Thank you for following your dream," I said finally. He nodded, returning to his work on the arrow. After a moment, he spoke again without looking up. "The same dream has returned twice since we began this hunt. I believe it means we are on the right path." I wanted to ask more about his dreams, about his beliefs, about what would happen after our hunt for Jackson concluded. Instead, I banked the fire and prepared my bedroll, sensing that some questions were better left for another time. As I drifted towards sleep, I thought about the 2 men I had seen at Fort Hanson. They were riding north when they left, but according to the traders, Jackson's hideout was in the southern Black Hills. Were they on some errand for their leader, or had the traders' information been wrong? Swift Hawk and I would need to proceed carefully, gathering more intelligence before approaching the mining camp. If Jackson had indeed established a base there, it would be well defended and difficult to approach without detection. We would need more than determination and righteous anger to bring him to justice. In the morning, we would begin the journey to the Black Hills, sacred ground to the Lakota, and now defiled by the presence of men whose hands were stained with innocent blood. What awaited us there, I could not know, but as I fingered the bear claw necklace at my throat, I felt a surge of resolve. Jackson had taken everything from me, my husband, my future, my innocence about the world's capacity for cruelty. In doing so, he had unwittingly created his own nemesis. The woman he had left chained to die was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to seeing justice done. The next day dawned clear and cool, with spring asserting itself more confidently across the awakening landscape. Swifthawk plotted our course toward the Black Hills, choosing routes that would keep us away from settlements and common travel paths. We rode at a steady pace, alert for signs of other travelers or potential threats. By midday, we had reached a high ridge that offered views of the terrain ahead, rolling prairie, giving way to increasingly rugged country, with the dark silhouette of the Black Hills visible on the distant horizon. Swifthawk dismounted, studying the landscape through narrowed eyes. We should reach the foothills by tomorrow evening, he estimated. From there, we'll need to locate the canyon where this mining camp lies. I joined him at the ridge's edge, taking in the vast expanse before us. The traders mentioned it was in the southern portion of the hills. Does that narrow our search? Somewhat. There are several abandoned mining operations in that region. The white men came seeking gold a few years ago, then left when they found little. Their empty camps scar the sacred hills like wounds that haven't healed. There was an edge to his voice I hadn't often heard, a glimpse of the anger he usually kept carefully contained. Your people consider the Black Hills sacred land, I said. Not a question, but an invitation for him to share more. Swifthawk nodded. Paha Sapa is the heart of everything that is. It was given to the Lakota by Wakantanka in the time before memory. Our most important ceremonies take place there. Our holy men receive visions among its peaks. He gestured toward the distant mountains. The treaty promised it would remain ours forever, but forever to the white man means only until something valuable is discovered. I felt a familiar shame at being associated with those who had broken such promises. I'm sorry, I said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. You did not make these decisions, Swifthawk replied, his tone softening. And you have shown more respect for our ways than most who share your skin color. We remounted and continued our journey, the conversation turning to more immediate concerns, our supplies, the condition of our horses, the weather patterns that might affect our tracking. By sunset, we had covered significant ground, making camp in a shallow cave formed by an overhanging rock face. As we prepared our evening meal, Swifthawk suddenly went still, his head tilted slightly. I had learned to recognize this posture. He was listening to something beyond my capacity to detect. What is it? I whispered, my hand moving instinctively to the knife at my belt. Horses, he murmured. At least 4, maybe more, moving fast along the creek below. I strained my ears but heard nothing. Jackson's men? Possible. Or soldiers, or other travelers. Swifthawk moved silently to the edge of our elevated position, lying flat to observe without being seen. I followed his example, inching forward until I could peer down at the narrow creek bed about 50 yards below and 100 yards to the east. Minutes passed before I finally caught the sound, the rhythmic thud of hooves against earth, growing gradually louder. Then I saw them, 6 riders emerging from a stand of trees, following the creek in the fading light. My breath caught as I recognized the red bandana around the leader's neck. Jackson, I whispered, the name like acid on my tongue. Swifthawk nodded once, his expression unchanged, but his body tensing like a drawn bowstring. We watched in silence. As the group passed below us, close enough that I could make out individual features, Jackson himself rode point, his scarred face set in a perpetual scowl. Behind him came Reeves, with his distinctive limp evident even on horseback, then Webb and 3 others whose names I didn't know, but whose faces I remembered from my time in captivity. They were heading southwest, toward the Black Hills. Were they returning to their hideout after some raid or errand? If so, they might inadvertently lead us directly to the Wilson mining camp, saving us days of searching. "We follow," Swifthawk decided as the riders disappeared around a bend in the creek. "But not too closely. They will be watchful." We quickly extinguished our small fire and packed our few belongings. Within minutes, we were mounted and descending carefully toward the creek bed, now empty save for the tracks left by Jackson's horses. Swifthawk studied these marks in the gathering darkness, then pointed southwest. "They ride as men who know their destination and feel no need for caution," he observed. "They believe themselves safe in this territory." "That will be their mistake," I replied, a cold determination settling in my chest. We followed the tracks through the night, keeping a safe distance behind Jackson's group. Swifthawk's night vision and tracking skills allowed us to maintain their trail even in near total darkness. By dawn, we had entered the first foothills of the Black Hills, the terrain growing steadily more rugged and forested. Here, Swifthawk signaled for increased caution. "They will have sentries watching the approaches to their camp," he warned. "From now on, we move only as shadows move, silently and unseen." We concealed our horses in a dense thicket near a small spring, continuing on foot. Swifthawk applied dark pigments to our faces and hands, a mixture of ash, clay, and plant dyes that would help us blend with the forest shadows. We carried only essential weapons, his bow and hunting knife, my revolver and the tomahawk I had learned to throw with reasonable accuracy. For hours, we tracked Jackson's party through increasingly difficult terrain, moving from cover to cover with painstaking patience. The sun had reached its zenith when Swifthawk suddenly raised his hand, signaling me to freeze. He pointed silently. Ahead, where the forest gave way to a narrow canyon entrance, partially concealed by a natural formation of rocks and trees. A man sat on a boulder near this entrance, rifle across his knees, scanning the forest with bored regularity. A sentry, just as Swifthawk had predicted. Beyond him, I could make out the dim shapes of crude wooden structures, the Wilson mining camp presumably. We retreated carefully to a secure position where we could converse in whispers. "We've found their hideout," I said, struggling to contain the emotion in my voice. After months of preparation and weeks of tracking, Jackson was finally within reach. The man who had murdered Thomas, who had left me to die chained to that oak, who had destroyed countless lives with his brutality, was less than half a mile away. Swifthawk studied my face. "We must observe first," he cautioned. "Learn their routines, count their numbers, understand the layout of the camp. A hasty attack would fail." He was right, of course. 2 against 8 were poor odds under any circumstances, but especially when the 8 were well-armed killers in a defensive position. We needed patience and strategy, not blind vengeance. "We'll watch for 3 days," Swifthawk continued. "Learn when they sleep, when they guard, when they hunt, then we make our plan." 3 days felt like an eternity with Jackson so close, but I nodded agreement. "Where do we observe from?" Swifthawk pointed to a steep ridge overlooking the canyon. "From there we can see the entire camp without being seen, but reaching it will require climbing the rock face on the eastern side. A difficult path, but one they won't expect anyone to take." The climb proved as challenging as he had suggested. We ascended slowly, testing each handhold, avoiding dislodging rocks that might alert the sentries below. By late afternoon, we had reached a position that offered an unobstructed view of the mining camp while concealing us among tumbled boulders and stunted pines. What I saw below both confirmed our suspicions and complicated our task. The Wilson camp consisted of 5 weathered buildings arranged in a rough semicircle around a central clearing. The largest was presumably the former mine office, with smaller structures that had once housed workers, equipment, and supplies. The entire camp was nestled in a box canyon with sheer walls on three sides and only one narrow entrance, the one we had observed earlier with its posted sentry. I counted 11 men moving about the camp, 3 more than we had anticipated. Had Jackson recruited additional members since the traders had last heard reports? Or were these temporary allies, perhaps members of another outlaw group sharing the hideout? Either way, our already difficult odds had just grown worse. Swift Hawk made the same observation. 11, he murmured. Too many for direct confrontation. We settled into watch as the day's light faded. The outlaws' routine became evident quickly enough. 2 men always on guard, 1 at the canyon entrance and 1 patrolling the perimeter of the camp itself. The others occupied themselves with various tasks: tending horses in a crude corral, cleaning weapons, preparing food, drinking and playing cards in what appeared to be the main building. Jackson himself emerged from this building as darkness fell, shouting orders that we couldn't quite make out at our distance. A fire was built in the central clearing, and several of the men gathered around it while others disappeared into the various structures, presumably to sleep. They are careless, Swift Hawk noted. They believe the canyon protects them, that no one knows their location. It makes them vulnerable, I agreed. But how do we use that to our advantage? Even careless. They outnumber us more than 5 to 1. Swift Hawk was silent for a long moment, studying the scene below. We cannot defeat them by force, he said finally. We must use strategy, separate them, reduce their numbers, create confusion. As night fully descended, we retreated from our observation point to a more comfortable position where we could rest without fear of being spotted. Tomorrow would begin our first full day of reconnaissance, gathering the details we would need to formulate a plan. As I settled onto my bedroll, exhaustion from the day's climb and the emotional intensity of finally locating our quarry washed over me. Yet sleep remained elusive, my mind racing with possibilities and uncertainties. What happens after? I asked quietly into the darkness, the question that had been growing in my thoughts for weeks finally finding voice. After we deal with Jackson, Swift Hawk clarified. Yes, when this is finished, one way or another. I didn't specify what one way might mean, but the implication was clear. Success was not guaranteed, and death was a very real possibility for both of us. Swift Hawk was silent for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I will return to my people. The larger band will be gathering near Bear Butte for spring ceremonies. After that, we will follow the buffalo herds north for summer hunting. And me? I prompted when he didn't continue. Another long pause. That is for you to decide, Sarah Collins. You spoke once of staying with the Lakota, learning our ways. That path remains, open if you still wish it. I considered his words, hearing what remained unspoken. Would I be welcome, truly welcome, not just tolerated because of what we've been through together? My grandmother has already called you daughter in her prayers, he replied simply. The children ask when you will return to tell them more stories. Bear Who Walks has said your heart is Lakota, despite your skin. He hesitated, then added, and I would be pleased if you chose to return with me. The careful neutrality of his tone didn't quite mask the sentiment behind his words. In our months together, we had developed a bond that transcended our initial roles as rescuer and rescued. What exactly that bond might become, neither of us had dared to articulate, but its presence was undeniable. I would like that, I said softly, to return with you. I have no home to go back to in the East, and what I've found among your people is more meaningful than what I left behind. Swift Hawk made a sound of acknowledgement, and though I couldn't see his face in the darkness, I sensed his satisfaction with my answer. But first, I added, my thoughts returning to the outdawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the canyon walls, shrouding the Wilson mining camp in ghostly white. From our elevated position, Swifthawk and I watched as Jackson's men emerged. From their shelters, grumbling and stiff from sleep, they gathered around a freshly built fire where one of them was preparing coffee in a large, blackened pot. The mountain air carried fragments of conversation upward to our hiding place, complaints about the cold, crude jokes, discussions of hunting and supply runs. They're running low on whiskey, I observed, noting the disappointment in the men's gestures as one shook an empty bottle. That might force some of them to make a trip to the nearest settlement. Swifthawk nodded. Division would favor us. Watch how they move, how they relate to each other. Knowledge of your enemy is as important as strength. I studied the scene below with careful attention. Jackson emerged from the largest building, and the subtle shift in the other men's postures confirmed his authority. He spoke briefly to Reeves, his second-in-command, who nodded and began directing the others to various tasks. 3 men left to check trap lines, according to their conversation. 2 others began repairing a damaged wall on one of the smaller buildings. The rest tended to horses, cleaned weapons, or lounged near the fire. They operate like a military unit, I said, disciplined with clear hierarchy. Jackson leads, Reeves enforces, the others follow. Yes, Swifthawk agreed. But see how the man with the red shirt, Webb, watches Jackson. There is challenge in his eyes, ambition. He is loyal for now, but only because it serves him. As the day progressed, we noted the patrol patterns, guard rotations, and the outlaws' routines. By midday, we had mapped the camp's layout in our minds. Which building housed the main sleeping quarters, where they stored weapons and ammunition, which paths they used most frequently. In the afternoon, a new development caught our attention. 2 riders approached the canyon entrance, challenging the sentry, who eventually allowed them passage after a brief exchange. They were not part of Jackson's regular crew, a man and woman both dressed in the plain clothing of settlers. Traders, Swifthawk murmured as we watched the pair dismount in the center of the camp, bringing supplies in exchange for stolen goods or protection. Jackson emerged to greet the newcomers with surprising cordiality. Money and goods changed hands, along with what appeared to be information. The trader gestured repeatedly toward the east as he spoke, Jackson nodding thoughtfully. They bring news as well as supplies, I realized. Perhaps information about patrols, other travelers in the area, activities at nearby settlements. This explains how Jackson avoids capture, Swifthawk said. He has eyes and ears beyond his camp. The traders departed after about an hour, loaded with what I suspected were items stolen from various victims, watches, jewelry, fine clothing, that rough outlaws would have little use for, but could be sold discreetly in frontier settlements. As evening approached, the men who had been sent to check traps returned with several rabbits and a deer, which were quickly prepared for cooking. The camp settled into its nighttime routine. A large fire in the central area, men gathered to eat, drink the last of their whiskey, and gamble with cards and dice. We observed in silence, until full darkness made it difficult to distinguish details. Then we retreated once more to our secure position, where Swifthawk produced pemmican from his pouch, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that sustained us without requiring a fire that might give away our presence. "What have you learned?" he asked as we ate. I considered the day's observations. They're well organized, but growing complacent. The guards change every 4 hours. But the night watch is less attentive. I saw the sentry at the entrance nodding off briefly around dusk. The path to the largest building, where Jackson sleeps, is always clear, no obstacles. They post no guard at the rear of the canyon because they believe the walls are unclimbable. Swifthawk nodded approval. Good. What else? They have alliances with settlers. Those traders knew exactly where to find them and weren't afraid. That means others might know of this location too. They're running low on certain supplies, whiskey, coffee, perhaps ammunition, and their horses are kept in a corral near the canyon entrance, making them vulnerable. I paused, adding the final observation that troubled me most. And they're planning something. The trader was providing information about something to the east, and Jackson seemed very interested. Another raid, perhaps, Swifthawk suggested, or movement of soldiers or Indian agents that might affect their operations. We fell silent, each contemplating the implications of what we'd witnessed. After a while, Swifthawk spoke again, his voice low. Tomorrow we will learn which men leave the camp regularly and where they go. This may provide an opportunity to reduce their numbers, I concluded, understanding his thinking. If we could isolate smaller groups away from the main camp, we might be able to eliminate them one by one, gradually shifting the odds in our favor. The strategy was sound, but it would require patience, a commodity I found increasingly scarce. As I observed Jackson moving freely about the camp, laughing and commanding his men with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. This was the man who had ordered Thomas's execution, who had chained me to that oak and left me to die. Every moment he continued to breathe seemed an affront to justice. Swifthawk sensed my tension. Your thoughts are loud, Sarah Collins. I want him dead, I admitted, the cold certainty of my desire unsettling even to my own ears. I want to look him in the eyes as he realizes who I am, the woman he left to die who instead became his executioner. Revenge is a poison that can consume the one who drinks it, Swifthawk cautioned. Is that a Lakota saying? No, he replied with unexpected lightness. It is what my father told me when I was 16 and wanted to kill a Crow warrior who had taken my first horse. He was right. My anger would have led me into foolish action and probable death. I smiled, despite myself. And did you listen to this wisdom? No. I tracked the Crow for 3 days and stole back my horse, along with his prized rifle. But I did not kill him, though I had the chance. Swifthawk's expression grew serious again. There is honor in justice, Sarah, less in vengeance for its own sake. I nodded, accepting his gentle correction. Justice, then, but Jackson will not live to hurt anyone else. On this, we agree. We settled into our bedrolls, taking turns, keeping watch through the night. When sleep finally claimed me, my dreams were a confusion of images. Thomas falling as rifles blazed, Jackson's scarred face laughing as he locked the chains around my wrists, Swifthawk appearing like a spirit. Against the snow, I woke shortly before dawn, my body tense as if preparing for battle. The second day of observation brought new insights. Shortly after sunrise, Jackson dispatched Webb and 2 others on some errand, their horses loaded with what appeared to be furs and small bags that might contain gold dust or other valuables. They rode east, likely toward one of the settlements where such goods could be exchanged without too many questions. They'll be gone at least 2 days, I estimated, watching their departure. That leaves 8 in camp. By mid-morning, Reeves led another group of 3 on a hunting expedition, heading west into the hills with rifles and pack horses. This further reduction left only 4 men in the camp, Jackson himself and 3 others whose names I'd picked up from overheard conversations, Coffey, Benson, and Mills. The pattern becomes clear, Swifthawk noted. They separate regularly, confident that no threat exists. This is how we will defeat them, not all at once, but in smaller groups, away from their stronghold. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. The hunting party will be most vulnerable. They'll be focused on tracking game, making noise, not expecting an ambush. Yes, and they must return through the narrow entrance where the path follows the creek, a perfect place for an ambush. We continued our surveillance through the day, noting that Jackson rarely left the camp himself. He seemed to function as the group's strategist and leader, sending others to handle tasks that required leaving their secure base. This would make him the most difficult to reach and the most important to eliminate. As evening approached, Swifthawk and I began formulating our strategy in more concrete terms. The hunting party would likely return the following day with their game. We would position ourselves along the narrow creek path, concealed among the boulders that lined the approach to the canyon entrance. When Reeves and his men passed below, we would strike swiftly and silently, reducing Jackson's forces by 3, before they even realized they were under attack. "We should sleep now," Swifthawk advised as darkness fell. "Tomorrow will require all our strength and focus." I nodded agreement, though doubt suddenly gnawed at me. "Swifthawk, I've never killed a man in cold blood. In the heat of battle, yes, or to save my own life. But this, waiting in ambush, feels different." He studied me in the dim starlight. "It is different. Taking life should never become easy, even when necessary. But remember who these men are, what they have done. How many innocent travelers have they ambushed on lonely trails? How many women have they left chained to trees in winter?" His voice hardened on these last words. "They have forfeited any claim to mercy through their own actions." His logic was irrefutable, yet the knot in my stomach remained. This would be my first act of deliberate killing, not in self-defense or immediate danger, but as part of a calculated plan. I wondered if it would change me in ways I couldn't anticipate, if some essential part of Sarah Collins would be lost in the process. "Rest," Swifthawk said more gently, seeing my continued turmoil. "The path forward will be clearer with the dawn." I managed a few hours of fitful sleep before Swifthawk woke me just before sunrise. We ate quickly, then gathered only what we would need for the ambush: weapons, water, and a small amount of pemmican. The rest of our supplies remained hidden at our observation point, protected by carefully arranged branches and rocks. We descended the steep canyon wall using a game trail Swifthawk had spotted the previous day, narrow, treacherous in places, but navigable with care. It brought us to the forest floor, about half a mile downstream from the canyon entrance, where we immediately sought cover among the dense undergrowth. "They will return before midday if their hunt was successful," Swifthawk predicted as we made our way toward the ambush point. "They left with empty pack horses, which suggests they expected to bring back substantial game." We reached the chosen location, a sharp bend in the creek where the path narrowed between a steep rock face and the water itself. Anyone traveling toward the canyon would be forced to pass single file through this natural bottleneck. We positioned ourselves on the high ground, overlooking this passage, concealed among boulders and scrub pine. "How will we do this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though we were still alone. Swifthawk indicated his bow. "I will take the first man with an arrow as he rounds the bend. You target the second with your revolver. Aim for the chest, not the head. Once they realize they're under attack, they'll seek cover, making precise shots difficult. And the third, he will either flee or fight. If he flees, we let him go. He'll be easy to track later. If he fights, we deal with him together." The simplicity of the plan belied its dangers. These were experienced killers, well-armed and unlikely to surrender. Even with surprise on our side, the slightest error could prove fatal. We settled into position, weapons ready, and waited. The morning hours stretched endlessly, the forest around us coming alive with birdsong and the rustling of small animals. I controlled my breathing, focusing on maintaining absolute stillness while remaining alert. Just when I began to wonder if the hunting party had changed their route, Swifthawk tensed beside me. A moment later I heard it too, the distant sound of horses approaching along the creek bed. He raised 3 fingers, confirming that all members of the hunting party were returning. My heart pounded in my chest as the sounds grew closer. I gripped my revolver more tightly, its weight suddenly unfamiliar despite the many hours I'd spent practicing with it. Swift Hawk, by contrast, seemed utterly calm, his bow drawn with the arrow nocked, but not yet pulled back, his breathing slow and measured. The first rider appeared around the bend, Reeves recognizable by his limping gait even on horseback. He led a pack horse laden with what appeared to be a dressed deer carcass. Behind him came a stocky man called Bates, rifle resting across his saddle. The third rider, Davis, followed several yards back, apparently having fallen behind to adjust. Something on his horse's saddle. Swift Hawk's bow came up in one fluid motion, the string drawing back to his cheek. He held for the briefest moment, then released. The arrow flew true, striking Reeves in the chest with such force that he was thrown backward off his horse. Before Bates could fully register what had happened, my revolver barked, the shot echoing off the canyon walls as the bullet found its mark. The outlaw clutched his chest, his rifle falling unfired as he toppled sideways into the creek. Davis, alerted by the gunshot, immediately spurred his horse to retreat, but Swift Hawk was already nocking another arrow. It caught the fleeing man between the shoulder blades, and he slumped forward over his horse's neck. The animal, panicked by the smell of blood and the sudden dead weight of its rider, reared and bolted back the way it had come. The entire encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds. 2 men dead, 1 mortally wounded and being carried away by his frightened mount. The horses that had been carrying Reeves and Bates circled nervously, unsure what to do without their riders. I stared at the scene below, my revolver still raised, though there was no longer any need. I had expected to feel something profound in this moment, satisfaction perhaps, or the weight of having taken a life. Instead, I felt oddly hollow, as if watching events that were happening to someone else. "We must move quickly," Swift Hawk said, already descending toward the creek bed. "The fleeing horse will raise alarm if it reaches the camp." His words broke through my momentary detachment. I followed him down the rocky slope to where Reeves lay sprawled on his back, Swift Hawk's arrow protruding from his chest, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Bates had fallen face down in the shallow creek, the water around him tinged red with his blood. Swift Hawk checked both men to confirm they were dead, then quickly began gathering their weapons, 2 rifles, revolvers, knives and ammunition. "What about the bodies?" I asked, finding my voice at last. "Leave them," he replied grimly. "When they are discovered, it will create confusion and fear among the others. They will not know who attacked their men or why. We captured the horses, removing anything of value, supplies, ammunition, a small pouch of gold dust that Reeves had carried in his saddlebag. Then Swift Hawk slapped the animals' flanks, sending them running back toward the canyon. "The riderless horses will reach the camp before Davis's body is found," he explained, as we retreated into the forest, putting distance between ourselves and the ambush site. "Jackson will send men to investigate. We must be far from here when they arrive." We moved swiftly through the woods, following a route parallel to the creek, but well away from the path. The weight of what we had done, what I had done, began to settle on me as we traveled. I had killed a man with cold deliberation, not in the chaos of self-defense or the heat of battle, but as part of a calculated plan. The fact that he deserved his fate did little to ease the strange numbness that had taken hold of me. Swift Hawk seemed to sense my inner struggle. "The first deliberate killing changes something inside," he said, without looking back at me as we walked. "This is true for all people, Lakota or white. It should be difficult, or we become no better than those we hunt." "Will it get easier?" I asked, uncertain whether I wanted it to. "Yes," he said simply, "and that is what you must guard against." We continued in silence, covering several miles before Swift Hawk finally judged it safe to stop and rest. We found a sheltered position among a tumble of rocks that offered good visibility of the surrounding area while concealing our presence. "What happens now?" I asked as we shared water from his canteen. "Now, we wait," he replied. "Jackson will be more cautious after losing 3 men. The camp will be on alert. Patrols will increase. We must be patient, watch for the next opportunity." "Webb and his men will return soon," I noted. "Jackson will have his full strength again, minus the 3 we eliminated." Swifthawk nodded. "But they will be frightened, uncertain. They will see enemies in every shadow, waste energy defending against threats that do not exist." A hint of satisfaction crossed his features. "Fear is a weapon as effective as arrows or bullets." I considered this. We should use that fear. Let them know they're being hunted, but not by whom. "What do you suggest?" An idea formed in my mind, born of stories I'd heard about the psychological warfare practiced during the recent Civil War. We could leave a sign, something that would tell them this wasn't a random attack or competing outlaws, but deliberate justice. Swift. Hawk's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. A message. Yes, something simple but unmistakable. I reached up to touch the bear claw necklace that Grey Dove had given me. "What is the Lakota symbol for justice or retribution?" "We do not have one symbol for such things," he replied. "But—" He hesitated, then continued, "There is a mark that warriors sometimes leave when avenging a specific wrong against their family. A horizontal line crossed by 3 vertical marks, representing the balance being restored. Could you create such a mark? Leave it where Jackson's men will find it when they discover the bodies?" Swifthawk considered the suggestion, then nodded slowly. "It would increase their fear without revealing who hunts them. A good strategy." He looked at me with new appreciation. "You think like a Lakota warrior." I wasn't sure whether to take this as a compliment or a concerning indication of how much I had changed in the months since my rescue. Perhaps both were true. As darkness approached, Swifthawk left our hiding place briefly, returning to the ambush site to leave the symbolic mark carved into a tree near where Reeves and Bates had fallen. When he returned, he reported hearing distant voices and seeing torchlight along the creek, Jackson's men searching for their missing comrades. "They have found the bodies," he confirmed. "Many men moving with caution. They will be even more alert now." We spent an uncomfortable night in our rocky shelter, taking turns keeping watch. Neither of us suggested returning to our previous observation point high on the canyon wall. It would be too difficult to reach in darkness, and too risky with Jackson's men actively patrolling the area. Morning brought the sound of horses moving along the creek bed, a large group, judging by the noise. Swifthawk crept to a vantage point, then returned with news. "Jackson and 5 men, heavily armed. Webb has returned with his group. They are searching the area systematically." "Looking for us," I concluded. "Yes. We must move to safer ground, establish a new observation point." He studied the terrain thoughtfully. "There is a ridge to the north that overlooks much of this valley. From there, we can watch their movements while remaining beyond their search area." We traveled cautiously through the dense forest, alert for signs of pursuit. The ridge Swifthawk had identified was steep and rocky, making for difficult climbing, but providing excellent visibility once we reached its summit. From this new position, we could see Jackson's men fanning out through the valley, rifles ready, moving in pairs as they searched for whoever had ambushed their companions. "They will find nothing," Swifthawk said confidently. "The rain last night would have washed away any tracks we might have left. I hadn't even noticed the brief shower that had fallen during my sleep period." Another indication of how much more attuned Swifthawk was to the natural world than I would ever be, despite my months of training. We observed as the search continued, throughout the day, gradually moving farther from the creek as Jackson's men widened their efforts. By sunset, they had begun to retreat toward the canyon, clearly having found no trace of those responsible for killing their comrades. "What is our next move?" I asked as we made a cold camp on the ridge, not risking a fire that might be spotted from below. Swifthawk considered the question. We have changed the equation. They were 11, now 8. But they are also more alert, more cautious. Our next opportunity must come when they are vulnerable despite their awareness. When they're sleeping, I suggested. He shook his head. They will post additional guards now, maintain greater vigilance at night. We need a different approach. He paused, thinking. The traders who visited, they provided whiskey and other supplies. If more arrive, there will be celebration, drinking, decreased attention despite their fear. So, we wait for the next traders to visit, I concluded, but that could be days or weeks. Perhaps we create a reason for some of them to leave the safety of their camp. Swifthawk's expression was thoughtful. If their horses were to disappear, they would be forced to search for them, to separate again despite their caution. The plan was audacious. Stealing the outlaws' horses would require entering the canyon itself, approaching within yards of the guarded camp. But if successful, it would not only remove their primary means of transportation, but force them to divide their forces once more. How would we get past the sentry at the entrance? I asked. Not through the entrance at all, Swifthawk replied. There is another way, difficult, dangerous, but possible. The western wall of the canyon has a series of ledges that could be navigated by someone skilled in climbing. I saw them during our first day of observation, but thought them too risky to consider. Now, necessity changes our assessment of risk. I studied him with new understanding. Swifthawk had been mapping escape routes and alternative approaches from the moment we'd found the camp, planning for contingencies I hadn't even considered. His foresight reminded me yet again how fortunate I was to have him as my ally in this dangerous undertaking. When? I asked simply. Tomorrow night. The moon will be dark, good for stealth, though it makes the climbing more treacherous. We spent the following day refining our plan, studying the canyon layout from our elevated position, and identifying the best approach to the western wall, where the series of ledges Swifthawk had spotted would allow access to the interior of the outlaw stronghold. We observed the horse corral carefully, noting that it was positioned against the eastern canyon wall, relatively far from the buildings where the men slept. Jackson's increased security was evident. 2 sentries now guarded the canyon entrance rather than 1, and another patrolled the camp's perimeter throughout the day. The men moved in pairs even within the safety of their hideout, rifles always at the ready, eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls and surrounding forest. They are afraid, Swifthawk noted with satisfaction. Fear makes men either overly cautious or reckless. Jackson's men show signs of both, wasting energy on unnecessary precautions while missing the true threats. As dusk approached, we made our final preparations. We would travel light, only essential weapons and tools for the horse theft. Swifthawk fashioned several small pouches filled with a mixture of dried herbs and pine resin. Smoke signals, he explained. If we are separated, or one of us is captured, light these. The smoke will be visible for miles in daylight. I tucked 2 of the pouches into my belt, hoping we wouldn't need them. We ate a substantial meal of pemmican, knowing we might not have another opportunity for many hours, then began our approach to the western canyon wall as darkness settled over the landscape. The climb proved even more challenging than I had anticipated. The ledges Swifthawk had identified were narrow, broken in places, and slippery with spring moisture. We ascended, in near total darkness, feeling our way gradually upward, pausing frequently to ensure we hadn't been detected by the sentries below. This section is the most difficult, Swifthawk whispered as we reached a point where the ledge appeared to end at a sharp outcropping. We must go around and above it. Follow exactly as I do. I watched his shadowy form move with fluid grace around the rocky protrusion, finding hand and footholds invisible to my less experienced eyes. When my turn came, I mimicked his movements as precisely as possible, my heart pounding as loose gravel skittered away beneath my feet, falling into the darkness below. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than one, we reached a broader shelf about 2/3 of the way up the canyon wall. From this position, we could see the entire camp laid out below us, the buildings dark except for the main structure, where lamplight spilled from curtained windows, the corral where about a dozen horses stood or lay in repose, the sentries moving along their patrol routes. "We rest here until midnight," Swifthawk decided, "when most are sleeping and the guards are at their least alert." We sat with our backs against the canyon wall, conserving energy and observing the patterns below. The night air was cold, but not unbearable, the spring temperatures having risen significantly from the bitter winter months when I had nearly perished chained to that oak. As promised, around midnight, the camp grew quieter. The lamplight in the main building was extinguished, and only the sentries remained active, their movements becoming more predictable and more lethargic as the hours passed. "Now," Swifthawk said simply, rising from his position. We descended, a different route than we had climbed, following a series of narrow ledges that gradually brought us closer to the canyon floor near the southern end, farthest from both the camp buildings and the guarded entrance. The last 10 feet required a controlled drop to the ground, which we managed in turn, landing as silently as possible on the soft earth. Now came the most dangerous part of our plan, crossing the open ground of the canyon floor to reach the horse corral. We moved from shadow to shadow, freezing in place whenever a sentry turned in our direction. The horses sensed our approach, several raising their heads or nickering softly, but not loudly enough to alert the guards. Swifthawk reached the corral first, carefully working to loosen the simple rope gate while I kept watch. The nearest sentry was walking a circuit around the main building, his back currently to our position, but due to turn at any moment. "Hurry," I breathed, barely audible. Swifthawk's nimble fingers made quick work of the knot. As the sentry began to turn, we pressed ourselves flat against the corral fence, becoming part of the shadows. The man paused, seeming to sense something amiss, but after a moment resumed his patrol, moving away from us once more. With the gate now loose, Swifthawk slipped inside the corral while I remained on guard. He moved among the horses with a gentle confidence, speaking to them in low Lakota words that seemed to calm their natural skittishness around strangers. One by one, he guided them toward the open gate, where I helped direct them quietly away from the camp toward the canyon's southern end. We had managed to release 6 horses when disaster struck. One of the animals, perhaps startled by a noise or smell, suddenly neighed loudly and bolted, not toward the open gate, but directly away from it, crashing into the far side of the corral. With enough force to break through the weathered wood, the sentry shouted in alarm, raising his rifle. Swifthawk was already moving, leaping from the corral and pulling me toward the nearest shadow as the guard fired blindly in the direction of the disturbance. The shot echoed through the canyon, waking the camp instantly. Lights flared in the buildings, men emerging with weapons drawn, shouting questions and orders. "Run!" Swifthawk urged, pulling me toward the southern wall, where we might find shelter among the tumbled boulders at its base. We sprinted across open ground, fully exposed now as more shots rang out behind us. A bullet whizzed past my ear, another kicked up dirt at my feet. The freed horses were running in panicked circles, adding to the chaos, but also distracting our pursuers and making accurate shooting nearly impossible. We reached the boulders just as Jackson himself appeared in the doorway of the main building, shotgun in hand. "Circle around," he bellowed to his men. "Cut them off at the entrance." But we had no intention of heading for the canyon entrance. Swifthawk led me deeper into the jumble of rocks at the canyon's southern end, where the walls were lower and more broken than elsewhere in the enclosure. Behind us, confusion reigned as the outlaws tried to secure their remaining horses while simultaneously organizing a pursuit. "Here," Swifthawk indicated a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. "This leads to a chimney we can climb." The passage was so tight I had to turn sideways to squeeze through, the rough stones scraping my arms and tearing at my clothing. Beyond it was indeed a natural chimney, a vertical shaft between rock faces that offered a potential escape route to the top of the canyon wall. Swifthawk went first, showing me the best handholds. I followed, climbing desperately as shouts and occasional gunfire continued below. The chimney was perhaps 30 feet high, and by the time we reached its midpoint, outlaws had discovered the crevice we'd entered through. More shots echoed off the stone walls, bullets ricocheting dangerously close. "Keep climbing," Swifthawk urged from above. "Do not stop. Do not look down." I focused entirely on the next handhold, the next foothold, shutting out the voices and gunfire below. My fingers bled from the sharp rock. My muscles screamed with the effort, but fear and determination drove me upward until Swifthawk's strong hand reached down to pull me the final few feet to safety. We lay flat at the top of the canyon wall, catching our breath as the outlaws below realized we had escaped their immediate grasp. Jackson's voice carried clearly in the night air, issuing orders to search the perimeter, to guard the remaining horses, to be ready at first light to track whoever had dared raid their stronghold. "We need to move," Swifthawk said after a moment. "They will search the rim at dawn." We retreated from the edge, finding our way carefully down the outer slope of the canyon wall, then striking out across the forested terrain beyond. We traveled several miles before Swifthawk finally judged it safe to rest, finding shelter in a dense thicket near a small stream. "Did we succeed?" I asked, washing my bloodied hands in the cold water. "Or did we just make things worse?" "Both," Swifthawk replied honestly. "We freed half their horses, which will limit their mobility, but we also revealed that someone is targeting them specifically, not just passing travelers who happened upon Reeves and his men." I nodded, understanding the implications. Jackson will be even more vigilant now. Yes, but also more reactive, more prone to mistakes. Swifthawk's expression was grim, but satisfied. "And we have shown them they are not safe, even within their fortress. That knowledge will eat at their confidence like a disease." As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, I considered our next move. We had struck 2 blows against Jackson's gang, killing 3 men and stealing half their horses. They were weakened, but now fully alert to the threat we posed. Whatever advantage of surprise we had once possessed was gone. Yet I felt a fierce satisfaction despite the increased danger. Jackson would know now that someone was hunting him, systematically dismantling the security he had built around himself. He would wonder who had the skill and motivation to track his gang to their hidden stronghold, to scale seemingly unclimbable walls, to kill his men and steal his horses. Soon enough, he would have his answer. And when he finally faced me, the woman he had left chained to die, I wanted him to understand exactly how complete his failure had been, not just to kill me, but to break my spirit. In trying to destroy me, he had instead created the instrument of his own destruction. "What are you thinking?" Swifthawk asked, noting my expression. "That we're winning," I replied simply. "And that Jackson knows it." The forest grew silent as we moved deeper into Pahasapa, the sacred Black Hills. Swifthawk led us along hidden game trails, avoiding the wider paths where Jackson's men might search for us. 3 days had passed since our daring raid on the horse corral, and though we'd detected occasional signs of pursuit, we had successfully evaded our hunters thus far. "They do not know these hills as I do," Swifthawk explained as we paused beside a small waterfall to refill our canteens. "To them, this is merely a place to hide. To the Lakota, it is the center of the world. Every valley, every peak has meaning and memory." I watched him move with practiced ease across terrain that would have been treacherous for me alone. Despite my months of training, I still marveled at his ability to read the landscape, to anticipate dangers and opportunities invisible to my eyes. "Where are we going?" I asked, realizing I had been following without question, trusting his guidance. "To higher ground," he replied, "a place my grandfather showed me as a boy. From there, we can watch the approaches to the mining camp without being seen, and there is shelter, a cave large enough for both of us and well hidden from below." By midday, we had climbed steadily upward, the air growing thinner and cooler as we ascended. The forest changed around us, pine and spruce replacing the oak and cottonwood of the lower elevations. Swifthawk moved with increasing care, often pausing to study our back trail or listen to the forest sounds. "They are still searching," he noted, indicating a thin column of smoke rising from a valley several miles distant. "But they seek us in the wrong direction." The cave, when we reached it, proved ideal for our purposes. A narrow entrance concealed behind a tumble of boulders that opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber within. Ancient charcoal markings on the walls suggested it had been used by Lakota hunters or holy men in the past. "My grandfather's grandfather left those marks," Swifthawk explained, tracing one of the symbols with reverent fingers. "Stories of visions, of great buffalo hunts, of battles with enemies. This place has sheltered many who came before us." From the cave's entrance, we had a clear view down to the canyon that housed the Wilson mining camp, though it was too distant to make out individual figures. Swifthawk produced a brass spyglass, one of the few trade items he carried, and studied the camp carefully. "Movement near the entrance," he reported. "Riders returning. They appear frustrated, weapons lowered. Their search has been unsuccessful." I took my turn with the spyglass, confirming his assessment. 4 riders were entering the canyon, their body language conveying exhaustion and disappointment. I recognized Jackson's distinctive scarred profile as he emerged from the main building to meet them. "What now?" I asked, returning the spyglass to Swifthawk. "They'll be expecting another attack, waiting for it." "Yes, which is why we must do something unexpected." He settled back against the cave wall, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me, Sarah Collins, what would surprise a man like Jackson most?" I considered the question, thinking about the outlaw leader's psychology as I had observed it. "Direct confrontation," I concluded. "He's accustomed to striking from ambush, to preying on the vulnerable. He wouldn't expect someone to challenge him openly." Swifthawk nodded slowly. "And what would wound him most deeply, beyond physical injury?" "His pride," I said without hesitation. "His reputation. Jackson rules through fear and the perception of invincibility. If others see him as vulnerable, his authority diminishes." The hint of approval crossed Swifthawk's features. "You understand your enemy well. This is good." He leaned forward, lowering his voice though we were alone. "I propose we send him a message, not in symbols he might misinterpret, but in words he cannot ignore." "What kind of message?" "A challenge. From you." The audacity of the suggestion stunned me momentarily. "You want me to reveal myself? To let him know who's hunting him?" "Not directly," Swifthawk clarified. "Not yet, but to plant the seed of doubt, to make him question whether someone he believed dead might have returned seeking justice." I saw the strategic value immediately. Jackson believed he had left me to die, chained to that oak in the depths of winter. The possibility that I had survived, that I was now methodically dismantling his operation, would undermine his confidence far more effectively than anonymous attacks. "How would we deliver such a message?" I asked. "The trading post at Fort Henson," Swifthawk suggested. "Jackson's men still need supplies, especially now with fewer horses and men. They will send someone there eventually. We leave our message with the trader, Hansen, to be delivered when they arrive. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, playing on psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. By the time we had discussed the details, night had fallen, and we took turns keeping watch from the cave entrance, alert for any sign that our hiding place had been discovered. Morning brought clear skies and a decision. We would descend toward Fort Hansen, Swift Hawk remaining hidden in the surrounding forest, while I entered the settlement openly, not as a Lakota woman, but as Sarah Collins, widow, the identity I had used during my previous visit. Be cautious, Swift Hawk warned, as we prepared to depart our sanctuary. Hansen may have suspicions about your previous visit, especially if Jackson's men have spoken of a woman accompanying a Lakota warrior. I'll be careful, I promised. If there's any sign of danger, I'll withdraw without delivering the message. We traveled cautiously down from the higher elevations, staying off established trails and frequently checking for pursuit. By midday, we had reached a position about a mile from Fort Hansen, where Swift Hawk would wait while I continued alone. If you are not back by sunset, I will approach the settlement after dark, he said. Be prepared to signal if you need assistance. I changed back into my settler's dress, carefully concealing a knife in my boot and a small Derringer pistol in my pocket, precautions Swift Hawk had insisted upon. My hair was pinned beneath a modest bonnet, my manner subdued as I walked. Openly along the trail toward the trading post, Fort Hansen appeared much as it had during my previous visit, a collection of rough-hewn buildings centered around the larger trading post. I approached directly, my story prepared. I had taken the stage to Fort Laramie as planned, but found no safe transport to Missouri from there. I had returned hoping to find passage with another group heading east. James Hansen was behind the counter when I entered, sorting merchandise. He looked up at the sound of the bell, recognition and something like wariness crossing his features. "Mrs. Collins?" He greeted me, his tone carefully neutral. "Didn't expect to see you back this way. Thought you'd be halfway to Missouri by now." "The arrangements at Fort Laramie fell through," I explained with a rueful smile. "The stage was running, but the promised wagon train to Missouri wasn't. I thought perhaps I might find another opportunity here." Hansen's expression remained guarded. Not many folks passing through these days, especially with the rumors. "Rumors," I prompted innocently. He studied me for a moment before responding. "Strange happenings in the hills, men found dead along the creek, others reporting their horses stolen in the night. Some say it's angry spirits from disturbed Indian burial grounds. Others blame a band of rogue Sioux. Either way, travelers are avoiding the area." I let concern show on my face. How frightening. Perhaps I should continue on to Fort Riker instead. I named a settlement further east that I knew existed but had never visited. Hansen seemed to relax slightly at my apparent ignorance. "Might be wise, though you're welcome to stay at the boarding house while you decide. Emma would appreciate the company." "Thank you," I said, allowing relief to color my tone. "That's very kind. Before I settle in, though, I wonder if I might leave a letter with you. It's for a man who occasionally passes through here, someone who might be able to help me arrange transportation east." Hansen's eyebrows rose slightly. "Who might that be?" "A Mr. Jackson," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Frank Jackson. I was told in Fort Laramie that he sometimes trades in this area and might be heading east soon." The atmosphere in the trading post changed instantly. Hansen's posture stiffened, his hand moving slightly toward what I suspected was a shotgun kept beneath the counter. "Where'd you hear that name?" he asked, his voice hardening. "From a cavalry officer at Fort Laramie," I improvised. "He mentioned Mr. Jackson was known in these parts. Was he mistaken?" Hansen seemed to be weighing his response carefully. "Jackson's known, right enough, but not as someone a respectable widow should be dealing with. He's not the sort who helps ladies find safe passage anywhere." "I see," I said, feigning embarrassment. "The officer didn't specify." "Well, I'm grateful for your warning." I hesitated, then continued with apparent reluctance. "Still, if Mr. Jackson does come through, would you give him this? It contains information he might find valuable." I produced a sealed envelope from my pocket. Hanson made no move to take it. "Mrs. Collins, I don't know what game you're playing, but Frank Jackson is a dangerous man, the kind decent folk avoid." "It's no game, Mr. Hanson," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "Just a message that needs delivering. I'd consider it a personal favor." Something in my tone must have convinced him of my seriousness. He reached for the envelope with obvious reluctance. "I want no part of whatever this is, but I'll see he gets it if he comes through. No promises beyond that." "That's all I ask," I said, sliding the envelope across the counter. "Thank you." Inside that envelope was a simple message, written in clear handwriting on a single sheet of paper. "The woman you left chained to the oak is coming for you. Justice approaches on silent feet. Count your remaining days carefully." I had signed it with a deliberate smudge that could almost, but not quite, be read as Sarah Collins, enough to plant the seed of doubt, to make Jackson question whether I had somehow survived his attempt to kill me, but not enough to confirm it beyond doubt. Leaving the trading post, I made a show of inquiring about accommodations at the boarding house, securing a room for the night, though I had no intention of staying. I spent the next few hours maintaining my cover, taking a meal with Emma Hanson, engaging in appropriately mundane conversation about the difficulties of frontier travel, expressing concern about the rumors of violence in the area. As sunset approached, I excused myself to rest before dinner, slipping out through my room's window once I was certain no one was watching. I made my way carefully around the settlement's perimeter, avoiding the few residents still moving about, until I reached the rendezvous point where Swifthawk waited. "The message is delivered," I reported as we retreated deeper into the forest. "Hanson was reluctant, but agreed to pass it along when Jackson's men next visit." "Did he suspect your involvement in recent events?" Swifthawk asked. "He's suspicious, but of what exactly I'm not certain. He knows Jackson is dangerous and questioned why a respectable widow would be contacting him." I smiled grimly. Little does he know what this particular widow is capable of. We traveled through the night, putting distance between ourselves, and fought Hanson, in case Hanson's suspicions led him to alert Jackson's men immediately. By dawn, we had reached the foothills once more, finding shelter in a dense copse of pine as exhaustion finally overtook us. "What happens when Jackson receives my message?" I asked as we prepared a cold camp, too wary to risk a fire despite the morning chill. "He will react in one of two ways," Swifthawk theorized. "Either he will withdraw further into his fortress, increasing guards and becoming even more paranoid, or he'll try to flush us out," I finished. "Set a trap using himself as bait." Swifthawk nodded. "I believe he will choose the second path. Men like Jackson do not hide from threats. Their pride will not allow it. He will want to confirm whether you truly survive, and if so, to eliminate you permanently. Then we need to be ready when he makes his move," I said, checking my revolver methodically, "and ensure his trap becomes his grave instead." Over the next week, we established a new pattern of surveillance and strategic strikes. Rather than targeting Jackson's men directly, we focused on disrupting their operations, destroying food caches they had hidden throughout the hills, contaminating water sources near their camp with harmless but foul-tasting minerals, leaving a symbolic mark of justice in locations where they would discover it during patrols. Each action was calculated to increase their sense of being under constant observation, to deprive them of rest and confidence, to make them careless through fear and exhaustion. Swifthawk called it ghost warfare, never engaging directly, but always present, an unseen threat that could not be effectively countered. From our various observation points, we watched the psychological impact of our campaign unfold. The remaining outlaws traveled only in groups, jumped at shadows, and argued among themselves with increasing frequency and violence. Even from a distance, we could see Jackson struggling to maintain control over his increasingly fractious band. "They begin to break," Swifthawk observed one evening as we watched two of Jackson's men nearly come to blows over some disagreement. "Soon they will make a critical mistake." That mistake came sooner than we anticipated. On our 9th day of ghost warfare, we observed significant activity in the mining camp. Horses being saddled, supplies packed, weapons distributed. Through the spyglass, I watched Jackson addressing his men, his gestures emphatic, his scarred face animated with what appeared to be anger or determination. "They're leaving the camp," I said, passing the spyglass to Swifthawk. "All of them." He studied the scene carefully, not abandoning it. "See how they leave most of their supplies. This is a hunting party. They hunt us. How would they know where to look?" "They don't," Swifthawk replied, "but Jackson has likely grown tired of waiting for us to make a mistake. He chooses action over patience, as men like him often do." We tracked their departure from a safe distance, noting that they split into 3 groups of 2 men each, heading in different directions from the canyon. Jackson himself, accompanied by Webb, took the northern route, directly toward the higher elevations where our cave hideout was located. "He guesses well," Swifthawk murmured. "Perhaps too well. Someone may have spotted us near the cave. Or it could be coincidence," I suggested. 3 groups, 3 directions. One was bound to come our way. Whatever the reason, Jackson's approach toward our sanctuary presented both danger and opportunity. Swifthawk and I quickly formulated a plan. Rather than retreating from the approaching hunters, we would become the hunters ourselves, shadowing Jackson and Webb as they searched for us, waiting for the perfect moment to turn their hunt into our ambush. "Remember," Swifthawk cautioned, as we prepared to descend from our current observation point, "Jackson has survived many years as an outlaw. He will be alert to traps, suspicious of obvious opportunities. We must be smarter, more patient." I nodded, drawing strength from the bear claw necklace at my throat. "Today it ends," I said with quiet certainty. "One way or another." The forest held its breath as Jackson and Webb made their way up the rocky slope. Swifthawk and I moved like shadows through the underbrush, tracking them while remaining invisible. Hours had passed since we'd first spotted the outlaws heading toward our cave hideout, and now the moment of confrontation drew near. "They are overconfident," Swifthawk whispered as we paused behind a granite outcropping. "See how they move. Too much noise, too little caution." He was right. Despite their reputation as experienced frontiersmen, Jackson and Webb were making basic mistakes, talking in normal voices, breaking twigs underfoot, silhouetting themselves against the skyline as they crested ridges. Their arrogance would be their undoing. "The clearing ahead," I murmured, recognizing the terrain. "It's perfect." Swifthawk nodded his agreement. The small clearing lay in a natural depression, ringed by boulders and dense pines, with limited approaches and exits. Anyone caught in its center would be exposed from nearly all sides. A natural killing ground. "I will circle west," he said. "You take the eastern approach. When they enter the clearing, I will show myself briefly, enough to draw their attention. That is your moment." The plan was simple but effective. Swifthawk would create a distraction, allowing me the clean shot I needed to end this hunt once and for all. We separated, moving to our designated positions, with the silent efficiency born of months of training and partnership. From my concealment among thick pines, I watched Jackson and Webb approach the clearing. Jackson led the way, his scarred face set in a permanent scowl, his shotgun held ready as he scanned the surroundings. Webb followed several paces behind, a repeating rifle cradled in his arms and a revolver prominently displayed on his hip. "I'm telling you, Frank," Webb was saying, "we've been chasing ghosts for days. If there really was someone out here targeting us specifically, we'd have found some sign by now." Jackson spat into the dirt. "There's someone. That message at Hanson's proves it. Someone who knows about—" He stopped abruptly, apparently, unwilling to mention the woman he'd left chained to an oak, even to his trusted lieutenant. "About what?" Webb pressed. "Never mind," Jackson growled. "Just keep your eyes open. They're here somewhere." They paused at the edge of the clearing, Jackson instinctively hesitating before entering the exposed space. For a moment, I feared he might sense the trap, but his caution was fleeting. With a dismissive gesture, he stepped into the open, Webb following close behind. I steadied my breathing, raising my revolver slowly, waiting for Swift-Hawk's signal. When it came, it was perfectly executed. A flash of movement on the opposite side of the clearing, just enough to catch the outlaw's attention without exposing Swift-Hawk to danger. "There!" Webb shouted, pivoting toward the movement, his rifle coming up. In that crucial moment of distraction, I stepped partly from cover, my revolver aimed squarely at Jackson's chest. Time seemed to slow as our eyes met across the clearing, recognition dawning in his face as he realized who confronted him. "Remember me?" I called out, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. Jackson's scarred face contorted with disbelief. "You're dead," he stammered. "You froze to death chained to that tree." "Your mistake," I replied, my finger tightening on the trigger, one of many. What happened next unfolded with brutal swiftness. Jackson, recovering from his shock, attempted to bring his shotgun to bear. Webb, momentarily confused by the exchange, hesitated before swinging his rifle toward me. Swift-Hawk's arrow took Webb through the throat before he could fire, dropping him to his knees as he clutched futilely at the shaft. My first shot caught Jackson in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around but not dropping him. His shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ground as he stumbled. With remarkable resilience, he maintained his footing and drew his revolver with his uninjured arm. We fired simultaneously, his shot grazing my cheek, mine striking him squarely in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of profound surprise on his face, but remained standing. Swift-Hawk's second arrow ended any further resistance, piercing. Jackson sighed and driving him to his knees. I approached slowly, my revolver still trained on the outlaw leader as he knelt in the dirt, blood soaking his shirt front. Swift-Hawk materialized from the trees, bow at the ready, moving to check that Webb was truly dead before joining me. "You," Jackson coughed, blood speckling his lips as he glared up at me. "How did you survive?" "Providence sent me a savior," I replied, glancing briefly at Swift-Hawk. "Someone far more decent than you could ever understand." Jackson's laugh was a wet, gurgling sound. "Decent? A savage and a woman playing at revenge?" He spat blood onto the ground. "You think this changes anything? There are always men like me, always will be." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, leveling my revolver at his forehead. "But you won't be one of them." His eyes widened slightly. "Wait," he began, but I had waited long enough. The gunshot echoed across the clearing, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. Jackson toppled backward, the perpetual scowl finally erased from his face. I stared down at his body, searching for the surge of satisfaction or relief I had expected to feel in this moment. Instead, I found only a hollow quietness, the absence of the driving purpose that had sustained me for so many months. "It is done," Swift-Hawk said simply, laying a hand gently on my shoulder. I nodded, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Thomas was avenged. The other innocents who had died at Jackson's hands were avenged. Justice, as Swift-Hawk's people understood it, had been restored to its proper balance. We buried the bodies beneath a cairn of stones, not out of respect for the men, but to prevent scavengers from desecrating the site of justice. Swifthawk offered a brief prayer in Lakota, not for the souls of the outlaws, but for the continued harmony of the world now that a great wrong had been corrected. As we prepared to depart, I looked around the clearing one last time. This unremarkable patch of earth had become the conclusion of a journey that began in the bitter cold of winter, chained to an oak and left to die. I had traveled a path from victim to avenger, from helplessness to power, from the woman I had been to the woman I had become. "What happens now?" Swifthawk asked, echoing the question I had posed to him days earlier. I touched the bear claw necklace at my throat, feeling its power and protection. "Now we return to your people," I said with certainty, "if they will have me." His rare smile illuminated his features. "They are already your people too, Sarah Collins. They have been since the day Grey Dove called you daughter." We traveled north for 7 days, leaving the Black Hills behind and moving toward Bear Butte, where the Lakota Spring Gathering was taking place. With each mile, I felt the weight of my past falling away, not forgotten, never that, but transformed into something that strengthened rather than burdened me. On the evening of the 7th day, we crested a rise and saw the great Lakota encampment spread across the valley below. Hundreds of teepees arranged in the traditional circle, cook fires glowing in the twilight, horses grazing on the rich spring grass. Children played between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked at various tasks, men gathered in councils or prepared for hunting expeditions. "Home," Swifthawk said simply. As we descended toward the encampment, people began to notice our approach. A group of mounted warriors rode out to meet us, circling around before escorting us into the camp. I recognized Bear Who walks among them, his weathered face showing surprise and then approval as he identified me despite my Lakota clothing and changed appearance. Word of our arrival spread quickly. By the time we reached the center of the camp, a crowd had gathered. Grey Dove pushed her way through, her eyes filling with tears as she embraced me, touching my face as if to confirm I was real. The children, who had gifted me the carved horse months ago, danced around us, calling my name in excited voices. That night, as the council fire burned high, Swifthawk and I recounted our journey, the hunting of Jackson, the justice delivered, the balance restored. When we finished, Bear Who Walks rose to speak. "The woman who came to us in winter has returned in spring," he announced to the gathered tribe. "No longer a stranger seeking shelter, but a warrior who has walked the difficult path with courage and wisdom." He turned to me. "What do you seek now, Sarah Collins?" I stood, aware of all eyes upon me. "I seek a place among you," I replied in the Lakota phrases I had practiced carefully. "Not as a visitor, but as one who would learn your ways, share your burdens, celebrate your joys. I have no home to return to in the East. My home, if you will have me, is here." A murmur of approval spread through the gathering. Bear Who Walks nodded solemnly. "It is decided. You are Lakota now." Later, as the celebration continued around us, Swifthawk and I walked to the edge of the camp, looking out across the moonlit prairie. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, a sound that once would have filled me with fear, but now seemed a fitting melody for this moment of transition. "When I found you chained to that oak," Swifthawk said quietly, "I saw only a white woman near death. I did not see the future that would unfold from that moment." I took his hand, our fingers intertwining naturally. Could anyone have foreseen this path? From mail-order bride, to widow, to captive, to avenger, to whatever comes next? He finished when I hesitated. "The path continues, Sarah Collins. It does not end here." Indeed it didn't. As I looked back toward the circle of tippies, the dancing figures silhouetted against the firelight, I knew this was not an ending, but a beginning. The woman who had been chained to a tree in winter had found not just freedom but belonging, not just survival, but purpose. The chains that had once bound my wrists had been replaced by the bonds of a new family, a new community, a new life forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances. And as for the man who had freed me from those physical chains, Swift. Hawk, my rescuer, my teacher, my partner in justice, perhaps he would become something more as well. That path, too, stretched before us, waiting to be explored. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.